I need to tell you about a riddle that's been haunting me for decades. Every major nation on Earth is drowning in debt, yet somehow the world keeps spinning. Let me paint you a picture that will change everything you think you know about money. Picture this. You're sitting across from me in my Athens office, the Mediterranean sun filtering through ancient olive trees outside. I've just finished reviewing the latest global debt figures, and my hands are literally shaking. Not from age, from what I've discovered. Here's the mystery that should terrify every person on this planet. The United States owes $38 trillion. China, $18 trillion. Japan's debt equals 230% of their entire economy. Every major nation is in the red. But here's the part that doesn't make sense. If everyone's borrowing, who exactly is doing the lending? 3 years ago, I was giving a lecture at Cambridge when a student asked me a simple question that stopped me cold. "Professor Varoufakis," she said, "if my family borrows money, we know exactly who we owe. But when countries borrow trillions, where does that money actually come from?" I started to give her the textbook answer, then paused. Because in that moment, I realized something that would keep me awake for the next 1,000 nights. The conventional explanation was a lie. Or at least, it was hiding a truth so disturbing that once you understand it, you'll never look at your pension, your savings, or your government the same way again. Let me tell you about Sarah Martinez, a 55-year-old high school teacher from California. She doesn't know it, but she holds the key to understanding this entire global mystery. Every month, Sarah watches a portion of her salary disappear into her pension fund. She worries about the national debt she sees on the news, those scary $38 trillion headlines. She wonders how her country will ever pay it back. But here's the twist that will blow your mind. Sarah eyes the lender. Her pension fund, along with millions like her, owns $24 trillion of US government debt. The very debt she's worried about, she's the one providing the money for it. And if the government suddenly paid it all back tomorrow, Sarah's retirement would collapse. This isn't just irony, it's the most sophisticated financial magic trick ever performed. And Sarah, like 99% of the world, has no idea she's both the magician and the audience. But Sarah's story is just the beginning. Here's where this gets truly bizarre. Remember that $38 trillion US debt. Nearly $13 trillion of it is the government owing money to itself. I know how that sounds. Stay with me. The Federal Reserve, America's central bank, owns $6.7 trillion of government debt. The Social Security Trust Fund owns another $2.8 trillion. The Military Retirement Fund holds $1.6 trillion. Medicare owns a massive chunk too. Picture this. The government borrows from Social Security to fund other programs, promising to pay itself back later. It's like taking money from your left pocket to pay your right pocket. Except when governments do it, they call it fiscal policy. Last March, I received a call from a former student, now working at the Bank of Japan. His voice was shaking as he told me something that confirmed my worst fears. "Professor," he whispered, "you need to understand what's really happening here. Japan's debt is 230% of GDP, but 90% of it is owned by Japanese citizens. Our banks, our pension funds, our insurance companies, they're all buying government bonds because they literally have nowhere else safe to put the money." He paused, and I could hear the weight of realization in his silence. We've created a system where we're all lending to ourselves and calling it an economy. The most revealing piece of this puzzle came from an unexpected source. Last year, I was reviewing trade data when I noticed something that made my economics training seem worthless. China sells cars and electronics to America. Americans pay with dollars. Chinese companies need yuan to pay their workers. But if they all exchanged dollars at once, their currency would become too strong and kill their exports. So what does China do? They take those dollars and buy US Treasury bonds. America buys Chinese goods. China buys American debt. The money flows in a perfect circle. The debt is just the accounting record of this circular flow. This is when I realized the terrifying truth. Modern debt isn't what we think it is. It's not traditional borrowing. It's a complex web where everyone owes everyone else, and the system only works as long as everyone keeps pretending it makes sense. Here's the part that will change how you see everything. Global debt now stands at $111 trillion. That's 95% of the entire world's economic output. In just 1 year, this debt grew by $8 trillion. But here's the question that haunted my sleepless nights. Where did that $8 trillion come from? The answer is both simple and terrifying. It was created out of thin air. During the 2008 financial crisis, the Federal Reserve created $3.5 trillion with computer keystrokes. During COVID, they created another $4 trillion. The money didn't come from anywhere, it simply began to exist. Central banks around the world did the same thing. They created money digitally and used it to buy government bonds. Before you think this is fraud, let me explain the logic. During a crisis, the economy seizes up. People stop spending, businesses stop investing, banks stop lending, the government needs to step in, build hospitals, send stimulus checks, prevent collapse. But where does the government get the money for this? This brings me back to someone like Sarah, our California teacher. She saves diligently for retirement because she's responsible. But where does that saved money go? Into government bonds, because they're considered the safest investment on earth. And what does the government do with her money? It spends it on schools, hospitals, infrastructure benefiting people like Sarah. She simultaneously worries about government debt and depends on that debt for her financial security. If the debt disappeared, so would her pension. She's trapped in a system where her financial future depends on the very thing she's been taught to fear. 2 years ago, I was reviewing Japanese economic data when it hit me like lightning. Japan has the highest debt to GDP ratio in the world, yet they pay almost zero interest on that debt. Sometimes the interest rates are even negative, meaning investors pay the Japanese government to hold their money. How is this possible? Because Japanese citizens desperately need somewhere safe to store their wealth. They're aging, they're saving for retirement, and government bonds are the only asset that guarantees safety. The debt isn't a burden, it's a service the government provides to its own citizens. But here's where this system reveals its fatal flaw. The US paid $1 trillion in interest payments in fiscal year 2024. That's more than the entire military budget. These payments go to bondholders, pension funds, insurance companies, wealthy individuals, foreign governments. Think about what this means. Every dollar paid in interest is money that can't be spent on schools, roads, healthcare, or research. It's a transfer from taxpayers to bondholders. And as debt grows, interest payments grow, creating a feedback loop that could eventually consume everything. The Congressional Budget Office projects that by the early 2030s, according to current trends, interest costs could consume roughly 4% of America's entire economic output. In some projections, more than 1 in 5 tax dollars collected could go purely to interest payments. But it's not just America. Across wealthy nations, interest payments now average 3.3% of GDP, more than these governments spend on defense. There are countries where governments pay more to bondholders than they spend on education or healthcare combined. For developing nations, the situation borders on catastrophic. Poor countries paid a record $96 billion to service external debt in 2023. Some countries pay 38% of their export earnings just on interest. That's money that could build schools, hospitals, roads, instead flowing to foreign creditors. 61 developing countries now allocate 10% or more of government revenues to interest payments. Many are trapped in a cycle where they pay more to service existing debt than they receive in new loans. It's like making mortgage payments on a house that's sinking into quicksand. So why don't countries just default, refuse to pay? Because default is economic suicide. Your currency collapses, imports become unaffordable, your people's savings evaporate. Russia defaulted in 1998. The recovery took a decade. Argentina has defaulted 9 times, and each time the ordinary people suffered most. For major economies like the US or Japan, default is unthinkable. These countries can always print more money to make payments, but that creates its own demon, inflation. Print too much money and the currency loses value. That's not default, but it's its own form of economic catastrophe. Here's what keeps me awake now. This system depends on one crucial factor. Aging populations need safe places to store wealth. As long as people need government bonds for retirement security, the debt system continues. But demographic trends suggest this won't last forever. Birth rates are falling globally. Populations are aging faster than expected. In some scenarios modeled by economists, there might not be enough young workers to support retirees and service growing debt loads. When that breaking point comes, and some projections suggest it could be within decades, the entire system faces an existential crisis. What happened during quantitative easing reveals the darker truth about this system. When central banks create money to buy government bonds, where does that money end up? Theory says it flows into the economy, encouraging lending and spending. Reality is different. That newly created money ended up in the hands of banks and financial institutions. Instead of lending it to small businesses or home buyers, they bought stocks, bonds, and property. Asset prices exploded. Research by the Bank of England estimated that quantitative easing boosted stock and bond prices by about 20%. Sounds good, until you realize that 40% of the stock market is owned by the wealthiest 5% of the population. the richest 5% became about $128,000 wealthier on average. Meanwhile, families who owned little to no financial assets saw minimal benefit. We create money to save the economy, but that money disproportionately benefits those who are already wealthy. The system works, but it exacerbates inequality. The riddle I posed at the beginning has a simple answer. We are all the lenders. Through our pension funds, our banks, our insurance policies, our government central banks, creating money from nothing, we collectively lend to ourselves. This system has enabled incredible prosperity. It's financed the infrastructure, research, education, and healthcare that built our modern world. But it's also created the largest debt burden in human history, with interest payments that grow like cancer, consuming resources that could build our future. The question isn't whether this can continue indefinitely. Nothing in economics continues forever. The question is how it ends, gradually, through wise policy and economic growth, or suddenly in a crisis that forces painful changes on everyone at once. Looking at the mathematics of global debt, the trajectory of interest payments, and the demographic time bomb ticking beneath it all, I fear we're running out of time for the gradual option. The longer we wait to address these fundamental contradictions, the narrower the path becomes between managed transition and chaotic collapse. The $111 trillion mystery isn't really a mystery at all. It's a mirror, reflecting back our collective choices about the kind of economy we've built. And that mirror is starting to crack.